So the mission of the Red Willow is to use the wisdom of mind-body medicine to help people who have experienced trauma.
If I were in a group of 1,000 people and I said, how many of you have had trauma in your life? I can bet you that 999 of them would raise their hands. I don't think you can get into adulthood without having some adverse life event happen to you.
It really started with the understanding that there is more to recovery from traumatic experiences than what has been traditional in terms of Western culture.
We have this gap in Missoula. We don't have access to healing, ready access. So how could we do that? So we talked about calling people up and getting people together from various organizations or community members or whoever wanted to come, therapists or, providers or anybody who wanted to come. And we got a group of people together and we talked about what do we know about trauma.
I think this dialogue between empirical Western science and, in this case, the Asian traditions, mindfulness in the Asian tradition, is really key to what Red Willow is about. Certainly,
talk therapy is incredibly important. Medications, when they're necessary, are incredibly important. And yet there's more. There was beginning to be a recognition that trauma is stored in the body in a very physical way.
Around the last year of college, I sank into a really deep depression and just didn't know what was going on. Just found myself miserable and didn't feel like, as that continued, it was clinical depression, so it was like months of real deep depression. Feeling confused and isolated and so at one point, at a point, I was contemplating suicide, and I remember lying in bed one night and just thinking, I don't want to live anymore. This is too much pain. And I thought of all these different ways that people talk about killing themselves, and I realized I couldn't do that. So I was lying in bed one night and just felt like I just wanted to disappear, and I felt like I couldn't do it physically, but I felt like I could do it, I could just check out.
In 1965, kind of right off the bat, I was drugged and raped at, not on campus, but by some people from campus. And because I was drugged, I didn't really have access to that, although my body, as I learned more later, my body certainly absorbed all of that and it was stuck in there. And I didn't realize what the impact would be until I was in my 50s and it started to emerge in this really leaky way that I couldn't sort of stuff back in. So I had to get help. But so there's that background which is likely propelled me to do the work that I ended up doing.
What we do know is that particularly adverse childhood experiences are, they take up their residence in the body of a child in a way that plays far out into the future, into adulthood.
We brought Bessel van der Kolk here in 2009, and Bessel, Dr. van der Kolk, is a internationally renowned researcher. He's a psychiatrist, and he is someone who has used yoga and meditation in his practice as a psychiatrist to help people who have experienced trauma.
300 people came from 6 states. And from there, that conference was the catalyst from which Red Willow emerged. And I think it was a catalyst because we had such good response to this training, and also because it was such an acknowledged need that we needed healing in Missoula. How are we going to do that? Listening to him blew my mind. And to find that trauma resides in our body and that the body holds on to it, and that it's part of the fight or flight or freeze, or in that fight or flight or freeze system that is ancient. So we're not fighting tigers, saber-toothed tigers anymore, but our bodies are reacting in the same way to our modern traumas.
I teach the mindfulness-based stress reduction class. I teach a shorter class for working directly with anxiety. And I teach another class called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which was developed out of MBSR and works primarily with people who have long-term depression. It works with people who've experienced multiple depressions and are currently undepressed but don't want to relapse. So MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, was founded by a gentleman called Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he was actually a microbiologist, a PhD in microbiology at MIT or Harvard, but he had a meditative background, and he was really interested in bridging this gap between this more subjective approach to, more depth approach to healing, and an empirical Western science model. So when people do undergo this training, which is similar to the MBSR, they have a 50% drop in relapse in terms of depression. That's huge. That's way bigger than medication can provide. That, as an effect, that's a really powerful effect.
Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control did a huge epidemiological study that looked at 17,421 people, to be precise, who who were patients at Kaiser Permanente in California. And they asked questions about things that happened to people in childhood, things such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, witnessing, things such as that. And there were about 10 different categories that they looked at. The more the adults had experienced adverse childhood events, the more likely they were to have things like diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, to be incarcerated, or to have had difficulty with the law. So we're talking about chronic physical and sociological and psychiatric impacts of early childhood experiences.
Irrefutable body of evidence that shows that's the case. So as long as we're just treating the symptoms rather than addressing trauma, addressing childhood trauma, addressing these adverse circumstances that people have been exposed to, we're just throwing money at this situation.
After a couple months after getting approved for disability, I started having memories of being sexually abused as a kid. And it just made a lot of sense. It was really painful, but it also explained a lot. And it felt like, all right, this is sort of the ground that I'm starting with. Looking into my history, it grounded me in a lot of ways. It was like the only way I could go was in that direction. So I've been doing taking a lot of baths and doing restorative yoga and qigong and meditation and guided imagery. So it was this really empowering time the last couple months.
All those systems help your body release the trauma. And when you release the trauma, you can access your life. And it's nothing short of that powerful.
I had the personal experience myself, and then I see it happening with people that they become less angry, they become less resentful, they become less reactive, they suffer less. So it's really about different ways that we come back to ourselves. and come back to a better version or a less cluttered version, not a better version, but a less cluttered version of who we are. I mean, that's what we're all trying to get to ultimately as humans.
The process of healing, the process of therapy, deep therapy, is difficult and long and so rewarding. And this was true for me too. You can't straighten out your life and you can't heal from what's happened unless you have access to healing services.
The other thing that I've really appreciated is the scholarship fund. I could afford some of the classes that are like the lower end things, but some of them are a good amount of money, and there's no way I could have taken those. So it's this thing that it's just like amazing how it's available for people who don't have a lot of money.
What we need to do for folks is to give them the tools to go back and simply look at what happened to them as a child. And this is what the therapies and the classes that are taught at Red Willow Learning Center do. It enables an individual to go back and, in the peace and calm of a group, to be able to experience that trauma, to look at it and know that they're safe, and be able to say, I see this for what it was. I don't have to respond to it anymore. That threat is no longer here for me. And simply to breathe into that experience and then be able to let it go.
It takes all of this. It takes medical doctors, it takes a therapist, it takes medication, it takes yoga, it takes all of this. That everything has its place. And what my fervent hope is for us as a culture, as a nation, is that we can start to understand where it all fits and use and get better at using the right tool for the job at hand.
I'm starting to be in a place where I have more things available to offer. I think those things have been in me, but they haven't been accessible. And there's been a lot of things I've needed to take care of in order to get to the place where I can be giving to other people. Yeah, so I'm looking into doing some volunteer work, and hopefully start, I mean, my dream is to teach classes here.
Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if every community had someplace like this?
I love this journey. I really love this journey, and I love Red Willow. I love where we've ended up.